And the world's tallest bridge.
The world's tallest bridge. The world's tallest bridge. The structure will reduce travel time in the Chinese city from 2 hours to 1 minute.
America has the Golden Gate Bridge, but it's vastly outdated. China has quietly pulled far ahead with its Huajiang Canyon Bridge.
It is super dramatic to be under this bridge. It's beautiful, and it is remarkable how high this bridge is and how long it extends.
By building this masterpiece atop a canyon so deadly that it is known as the Earth's cracks, China has made one thing clear. When it comes to doing the impossible, China is the king. But what's even more fascinating is how they did this impossible feat. A pressing problem. Located in the Guizhou province of China, the Huajiang Canyon Bridge is a marvel of Chinese engineering. But to understand the significance of this bridge, we must first take a look at the region it is located in. Guizhou province is an oddity when it comes to geography. It is the only province in China that does not contain even a single plain. Throughout the area, you will only find tall mountain peaks and deep valleys. And this has presented a unique challenge for the population that calls this region home. While the rest of China has raced ahead, building infrastructure that supports and promotes urban development and general prosperity, Guizhou province has been left behind. And the culprit behind that is the lack of highways. Building a single-lane road in this area is a near impossible challenge, let alone constructing highways to act as the lifelines for its economy. For each road built, the engineers have to carve through mountains, tunnel through solid rock, and of course, build bridges. And what's the result of all that? A poverty-stricken population with limited sources of income, stunted urban development, and next to no infrastructure available to scale and grow its industries. This disconnect created a divide between Guizhou and the rest of China. Seeing this disparity and the potential hidden within these peaks, the Chinese government decided to take steps to remedy the situation. In 2012, a large-scale project was launched aimed at building faster, more feasible routes, connecting the urban and industrial centers in the region with the rest of China. Money began pouring in for an array of projects to build roads, highways, tunnels, and bridges. But as China's engineering army turned to face the challenges ahead, it came across a gap that seemed impossible to surpass: the Huajiang Canyon. This canyon presented a seemingly impossible challenge. Between two gigantic mountains lies the Beipan River, creating a natural barrier that dares anyone to build across it. The project faced two choices. Either build a route straight over this hurdle, creating the shortest, most direct route possible, or find an alternative route that would bypass the Huajiang Canyon completely. However, doing so would have defeated the whole purpose of the endeavor. By creating an expressway bypassing the canyon, the route would become far too long to be feasible for quick transportation. On the other hand, building a shorter bridge on a lower part of the canyon would entail digging extensive tunnels to angle the highway downwards, which again wasn't feasible. In the end, the engineers realized they couldn't bypass this hurdle. They would have to build a bridge right over the canyon, and it had to be on the rim level to avoid extensive tunneling. This was the only way to create the shortest route possible for the highway. The proposed bridge was going to be unprecedented, both in terms of height and scale. And to make that possible, it would have to be designed to perfection. The intricate depth sign. When the engineers set out to design the Huajiang Canyon Bridge, they didn't really have a template to follow. Rather, they were breaking new ground in bridge engineering as they progressed. The first thing to figure out before designing the bridge was the challenges presented by the terrain. The bridge was going to be built over an extreme elevation. The distance between the deck and the ground below was 2,051 feet at its highest. You can stack 6.5 statues of Liberty below, and it still won't reach the bridge's deck. This effectively makes it the tallest bridge ever built. At the same time, this presented a huge challenge because when you build conventional bridges, you need to build supports across the span to hold it up. But for a bridge so high up, there is no way to build support structures in the middle sections. And for the Huajiang Canyon Bridge, proper support was critical. After all, it was going to be 9,480 feet across, There was no way all that metal and concrete could hold itself up. These constraints are what determined the type of bridge the engineers had to build. The span was too long for it to be a truss or arch bridge, and too high to be a beam bridge. The only feasible bridge type that would fulfill the unique requirements of building in these conditions was a suspension bridge. And even then, it had to be one of the world's longest suspension bridges ever built, supported by 2 towers on each end. The next challenge presented by the project was the mountains themselves. You see, the experts had to determine the proper anchor points and stable areas on each end of the canyon to build the 2 support towers of the bridge. However, the 2 sides of the canyon were drastically different in terms of topology. The north side had a very steep slope, while the south side was less inclined. This made clear that the construction of the North Tower was going to be significantly more challenging. Additionally, both sides had to be built on karst limestone bedrock. This type of rock is notoriously difficult to build upon. Karst limestone easily dissolves into water, and that ends up creating voids within the rock over time that threaten its stability. Building directly into this material wasn't going to be feasible. Engineers conducted tests throughout the selected anchor points to see which spots had the least amount of limestone in them. And based on these tests, the 2 main anchor points were finally chosen. Now the construction could finally begin. Building the impossible. The construction process for the Huajiang Canyon Bridge started officially on January 18, 2022. And from the very beginning, everyone knew this was going to be a daunting task. The first thing the workers needed was access to the site itself. You see, there was no existing road big and sturdy enough to deal with the heavy machinery and material loads that would be brought in to accomplish the project. So, the first order of business was to design and construct a ton of access roads. But that was easier said than done. Each access route had to snake through mountains, climb up steep slopes, and at the same time be sturdy enough for the kind of weight distribution it would have to bear, as thousands of tons of material would pass over them. It took months to build the roads for access, and even longer for all the equipment to be brought in. Some of the equipment being brought to the site was so large that they had to call in special transporters to carry it up the steep terrain. Once all the equipment was in place, the experts immediately began working on building the main feature of the project, the 2 support towers that would essentially be holding up the entire bridge span. Naturally, these towers were going to need to be extremely strong, and that strength will need to come from the foundations. The engineers drilled deep shafts into the solid rock, which were then filled with concrete and metal bars. This gave it enough strength to bear the enormous pressure that will be placed on it both from the tower above it and the vertical pull from the bridge itself. With the foundation firmly in place, the engineers proceeded to build the 2 towers at each end of the canyon. Due to the height difference between the 2 sides, the North Tower is designed to be 860 feet tall, whereas the South Tower is smaller at 673 feet in total. The construction of the tower used reinforced concrete similar to that of the base. This material was chosen due to its high strength and easy construction application. The workers created a precise framework for the tower from the ground up. As the framework was being created, rebars were placed within and concrete was poured inside. Building at such a height, a lot of variables had to be taken into account when pouring. The temperature and moisture levels were the main factors experts watched out for. When concrete is poured at such a massive scale, even minor thermal variance outside of desired parameters can mean disaster. The concrete may not set properly or may not end up being strong enough due to minor bubbles. That's why the engineers used tons of sensors to carefully monitor the temperature levels during the pouring process. In some cases, cooling systems were used to ensure proper temperatures, since as concrete sets, chemical reactions tend to produce additional heat, which can be detrimental. But the technicality of the project spanned far beyond just that. Another key point the experts had to be especially careful with while erecting these towers was the anchor point. The foundation alone wouldn't be enough to keep the bridge erect. To counteract the vertical forces exerted by the cables and the deck, the towers need to be reinforced with anchors. These are basically giant wires, like the ones you see on suspension bridges. But instead of holding onto the bridge itself, these wires connect to the surrounding terrain. Their tensile strength is enough to keep the towers from toppling over under the weight of the bridge. Installing these anchors was also a tough task. The engineers had to find points in the rocky terrain that were strong enough to resist the pull force. And then, they had to drill shafts and tunnels into these points, which were installed with the anchor ends. Next, concrete was poured in, sealing the entire thing shut. With all the anchors installed, the towers were finally strong enough to bear the weight of the bridge deck itself. Normally, to begin construction on a bridge deck, heavy wires are installed from one end to the other to create walkways. These walkways are essential as they allow workers and machinery to access the bridge deck area using suspended platforms to construct it. Usually, these walkways are simply pulled across or carried over using helicopters or cranes. But due to the extreme length and height of the bridge, that was not possible. Cranes couldn't reach this high, and bringing in a helicopter was too difficult in this remote region. The standard procedure for building a walkway at such an extreme height is to use rockets. A pilot line, which is a thin yet sturdy steel wire, is attached to the rocket, and it is shot from one end of the bridge span to the other. Then, the real magic happens. This pilot line is used as a guide to pull a thicker wire across. Then that wire is used to pull over an even thicker wire. This process goes on over and over again until the required suspension lines are built over the bridge span. But in the case of Huajiang Canyon Bridge, things went slightly differently. Instead of using a rocket to carry the pilot line across, which can be quite dangerous and unpredictable at times, the engineers used a drone instead. This provided them with more control over the pilot line while also reducing expenses. Plus, it was way safer. Next, with the suspension lines in place, the walkway was constructed spanning the entire length of the bridge. This became the basic platform on which the work will continue going forward. The next step in the construction of this massive bridge was installing the cables for the bridge deck itself. Unlike the cables for the walkways, these ones are much more massive. And that's because these have to bear extreme weight once fully constructed. However, these cables don't actually start out this big. Rather, it is a long, arduous, and extremely precise process. Engineers deploy high-strength multi-alloy coated steel wires which are installed from one tower to the other. Like thick strands, each wire is laid down one by one, being woven together with the others for added strength. As hundreds of these wires are woven, they are also compacted using powerful machines, so they get pressed together. This serves two purposes. First, it reduces the mass of the resulting main cable. And secondly, it seals the wires together, making the entire thing act like a rope. The final step in the construction of the Huajiang Canyon Bridge was the installation of the bridge deck. The engineers chose not to utilize a normal type deck for the project with a solid flat base. Instead, they opted for a truss-type deck, made up of steel beams connected together to create a framework. And there is a very important reason why. The Huajiang Canyon acts as a natural funnel for air. Wind currents travel through the valley, and sometimes these currents gain extreme speed. A normal deck design would have provided a flat surface for this air to strike against, creating extreme pressure. A strong gust to the structure would have easily ripped it to shreds. But by utilizing a truss design, the wind has ample places to pass through the structure without exerting much force upon it. But that isn't the only benefit of this design choice. The truss deck is also much better equipped to deal with the load distribution placed upon it by the cars and trucks that would pass over it under normal use. It will also be much more resistant to torsional forces caused by uneven weight distribution or wind forces. Now, while truss structures tend to be much lighter than conventional bridge deck designs, the sheer scale of the bridge meant an absurd amount of metal was used to create it. The deck section alone weighed 22,000 metric tons. That's about as many as 3 Eiffel Towers only for this project. All that weight will be suspended thousands of feet above the earth. But that doesn't mean the entire bridge section was installed in one go. For a bridge this huge, that would be completely impossible. Rather, The engineers utilized prefabrication techniques to make the construction process much smoother. The deck was built in small sections, each one built in a factory off-site before the construction began. These sections were then transported to the site for installation. The installation process utilized to place these segments in place was ingenious. Since normal cranes couldn't be used due to the extreme height, and helicopters wouldn't be able to lift the heavy segments, the engineers chose a less conventional route. They deployed hanging cranes that ran on the main cable of the bridge to move. These cranes picked up the segments one by one and carried them to the center of the bridge. From there, the bridge deck was built outward towards both sides at the same time. These cranes were designed to be extremely precise. Each segment is put in place with millimeter-level precision. As the deck progressed, the strain on the cable changed. They deformed somewhat in the beginning due to the uneven weight distribution. But over time, as the deck neared completion, the cable assumed its correct shape. At last, in August 2025, the bridge was at last finished. But the work wasn't done yet. Before such an ambitious project could go into operation, the experts first had to confirm it could deal with anything nature and man could throw at it. Testing the giant. The rigorous testing of the Huajiang Canyon Bridge began with a static load test. 96 trucks weighing 3,300 metric tons were parked atop the bridge. They were parked in rows in each lane, stationed at precise spots on the bridge where they would be producing the most amount of stress on the bridge. And as these trucks sat in place, sensors installed all across the bridge provided readings on the stress levels in the structure, while the optical cables built into the cables showed how they were responding. These readings were then compared with the computer model predictions to see if they were within an acceptable range. Next came the time for dynamic loading. Trucks laden with heavy weights were moved across the bridge at varying speeds to simulate the real-world conditions it will experience during normal traffic. The engineers watched out for any indications of vibrations or oscillations developing in the structure that could threaten its stability. They also looked for any resonance effects that could cause amplified vibration and cracks to appear. Sudden braking tests were conducted as well to see if a sudden stop of traffic due to some emergency could create adverse conditions on the bridge. Aside from that, the effects of wind were also tested on the bridge with sensors providing data on the stress points and joint behavior during strong winds. Extensive tests like these ensured that the bridge would stay safe and sturdy no matter what angle the wind hits it at. Once all these tests were conducted, the results finally came in. The bridge proved to be perfectly safe on August 25, 2025. It was given its proper certification, with the authorities giving the green light for operation. On 28 September 2025, the Huajiang Canyon Bridge officially opened to the public. And with its opening, a wave of change was felt throughout Guizhou. A transformation achieved. Guizhou, a region that had historically been isolated from the rest of China except by slow single-lane roads, now had a full four-lane highway to bring in new opportunities with the completion of the Huajiang Canyon Bridge. Crossing this canyon alone used to take at least 70 minutes with winding roads going down and then back up the terrain. But with the new bridge, that travel time was reduced to just over a minute. For daily commuters, this was a life-changing development. They can now spend less time traveling and get more free time in the day to be productive or spend time with their families. Aside from that, this has proven extremely useful for emergency situations. Ambulances and fire trucks can reach their destinations way faster. The biggest change, however, has been economic. The agricultural products from the rural areas that are littered across Guizhou now have access to bigger markets. Fresh produce can be transported much faster over longer distances to reach urban centers. Workers can get to their jobs faster and seek opportunities in a broader region than the one they had available. The ripple effects of all this have been felt all across Guizhou. The living standards for most people have increased. People are happier, healthier, and safer. But the Huajiang Canyon Bridge hasn't just been transformative in this manner alone. It has also been a herald of change as tourism has poured in droves ever since its opening. And there are a couple of reasons why that is the case. First is, of course, people coming from all across China and abroad to see the beauty of Guizhou, which is now much more accessible thanks to the infrastructure China has built. But aside from that, many tourists come especially to see the Huajiang Canyon Bridge. Being the highest bridge in the world, there is an allure to see it up close, especially when you look down from the middle of the bridge and see the valley and the river below in the canyon. And the engineers who designed the Huajiang Canyon Bridge foresaw that this would happen, which is why they made special care to incorporate aspects into the bridge that make it much more tourist-friendly. First of all, there is a glass floor catwalk across the length of the bridge, so tourists can test their courage by walking so far above the ground with nothing visible underneath them, just glass and empty space. There is also a large hallway with a similarly built floor that you can experience. But this is only one of the 3 main tourism-focused features of this bridge. Engineers also built a glass elevator that runs at high speed along the southern tower, giving a thrill and view unlike any other. And once you reach the summit, there is a specially themed cafe built into the tower as well for some refreshments. Most interesting of all, however, has to be the experience of jumping from the Huajiang Canyon Bridge. Not in a dangerous way, of course. The bridge has a special facility made for bungee jumping. There are also paragliding facilities and low-altitude skydiving facilities built right into the bridge. The Huajiang Canyon Bridge has essentially been engineered both as a practical masterpiece and as a tourism magnet. And this tourism is serving the additional function of further powering the economy in the regions while also helping the government recoup a hefty sum on their investment of about $300 million. But let's take a look at this from an engineering standpoint. China has done something unprecedented with the Huajiang Canyon Bridge. It has built the world's highest bridge, sure, but at the same time, the great minds working on the projects have pioneered many new ways of bridge construction that were previously unknown. Using drones for deploying pilot lines, using hanging cranes for bridge deployment, and of course the state-of-the-art aerodynamic design of the structure. Nearly everything about it has been groundbreaking, and that's where the true benefit lies for China. By building one bridge, they have learned how to construct many more similar bridges in the toughest conditions. They have the blueprint in hand. Now the nation is equipped to further develop its most isolated regions for economic growth and a better life for its citizens. Be sure to like the video, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.